So let's begin with sample question 1 about Canadian citizenship. So remember that with Canadian citizenship, we have 3 ways of obtaining citizenship. And understanding these 3 ways is really the key to making sure you get a perfect score on the ICCRC Full Skills Exam, or of course the highest score possible. So we're going to we've already broken down the 3 ways that people can obtain Canadian citizenship and tricky little elements to watch out for. Now we're going to take a look at this in the context of a sample question. So we saw quite a few examples in the lesson, and really we're going to extend upon not one of those examples, but certainly an element. And here is your question. So of course we have our countdown timer on here. And remember, in the real exam, if you're doing the math and you are dividing 100 questions into 3 hours, well, you know that you have 1 minute 48 seconds per question. In the seminar, we talk about why it's not really a good idea to strategize like that. But for the sake of this sample question, well, let's take a look at it. All right, so I'll stop talking now and I'll let you read through this, and we'll go over this, of course, throughout the rest of the video. All right, so I hope you had time to work through the question here. If this wasn't enough time, of course, remember that you can pause the video and try to work this out yourself. It's always more beneficial for you to work this out yourself and then take a look at the analysis. Okay, I'll read this to you just in case you are listening to this instead of watching. All right, so we have Heather. Now, Heather was born in Quebec City 20 years ago, while her father was working in Canada on a 4-year contract. Her father held the position of diplomat of foreign relations on behalf of the government of Madagascar, and her mother stayed home to take care of Heather and her 2 older brothers. When Heather was 3, her father was relocated to Tanzania for 8 years, then Guatemala for another 8 years, and the family finally resettled in Madagascar. Heather would now like to go back to Canada so she can begin a career in the tourism industry, but tells you that it is extremely difficult for her to get a job offer from overseas. A friend told her that because she was born in Canada, she is automatically a Canadian citizen. Is this true? And then we have our 4 options. We have A, due to the fact that her parents were under diplomatic visas when she was born, she does not qualify for Canadian citizenship. We have B, because she was born in Quebec, she needs to apply for CSQ and citizenship at the same time. C, Heather was born in Canada, so it does not matter what status her parents had at that time. She is automatically a Canadian citizen. And D, Heather's parents would have qualified for Canadian citizenship because they were in Canada for 4 years, which means that Heather would automatically be a Canadian citizen as well. All right, so let's break down this question. And I hope you got the question correct already, but remember, it's really important for us to take a look at why your answer is correct or incorrect. All right, so for the first option for us to take a look at, well, we have this one. So we have Heather was born in Canada. So regardless of the status of her parents, she is automatically a Canadian citizen. So we saw this in the slides when we went through the lesson. And remember, it's of course really important to know the exceptions to this. And we can see that this is definitely one of the exceptions, the fact that her parents were diplomats. So if someone's born in Canada, it's automatic really that they obtain their Canadian, or they qualify to obtain their Canadian citizenship. So they'll still need to apply, of course, for that certificate, but really their birth certificate essentially qualifies them for Canadian citizenship. Now we took a look at some examples, and remember we saw all of these here. And even if the parents were here illegally, well, that kid, that baby is a Canadian citizen. All right, and all these other ones that we saw as well. But remember this one here, if the parents are diplomats and in Canada as diplomats, so on a diplomatic visa, well, then the child born on Canadian soil is not a Canadian citizen. So that helps us to eliminate C. And even though in real life, I mean, you might not, I'm thinking for myself personally, I don't even know if I've ever met a diplomat from another country here in Canada. And I don't think it's very common for people to have this type of situation. But it is certainly a great element to test your knowledge of Canadian citizenship as it relates to people being born in Canada. So it's certainly something to remember in the context of your exam, even though in real life you might not ever meet a diplomat who has a child born in Canada. All right, so for the sake of the exam, let's continue on and analyze another option for the correct answer. And let's talk about B here. So because she was born in Quebec, she needs to apply for a CSQ and citizenship at the same time. So for a lot of you, you might be surprised that Quebec will play a role on your upcoming exam, even though I know when we talk to a lot of clients across Canada, they often mention that they didn't really study too much about Quebec immigration. And I think that's perfectly fine, really, in some ways, because for a lot of you, if you don't speak French and you're not going to join the MIDI, well, you're not going to represent Quebec-bound clients anyways. However, remember that part of the job of being an RCIC is knowing all the options, and understanding Quebec is certainly one of those elements that you will be tested on the upcoming exam. All right, so we could talk about this a little bit in analyzing this question, which is definitely going to help. Of course, our material is it's very thorough in everything really, but we've really added a lot of information about Quebec simply because we don't want you to waste too much time or invest too much time in going through the Quebec website. All right, so let's talk about the CSQ in this context. So we can see that, yes, she definitely was born in Quebec City, and her father was a diplomat at that time. So let's see. Well, if you don't know what the CSQ is, it's the Certificat de Sélection du Québec, and it's for people who want to immigrate to Quebec. So we've talked about intent quite a few times throughout all of these lessons, and just like any provincial program, if somebody intends to live in Quebec, well, they would apply through Quebec. And in order to apply through Quebec for PR, well, they need the CSQ. Now, once they have that CSQ, then the application would go to the IRCC. And that, of course, means that's the federal portion of it. And this process itself is, in some ways, it's very similar to provincial nominations and how people obtain PR through provincial nominations. Now, when we look at this through the context of this question, well, we're looking at the Citizenship Act again. And we could see that if a person's born in Canada, well, a person is a citizen. Now, as we dig into the Citizenship Act more, well, you can see that they say in Canada here, and there is no mention of Quebec being excluded from that. All right, so with this analysis, well, we know that she does not have to apply for a CSQ, so she doesn't have to apply for PR in order to obtain her citizenship in this context. And I'm talking about automatically being a Canadian. All right, for D, so D should be, I think, a pretty easy one for you, but you know what, sometimes in the exam, it's a big exam, and you're going to be under a little bit of stress, so you might get tricked with this. Well, D is, I think, very easy. All right, so it says Heather's parents have qualified for Canadian citizenship because they were in Canada for 4 years. Now, is this true? If someone is in Canada for 4 years, does that automatically mean that they qualify for Canadian citizenship? And the answer is, of course, no. If you think of an international student, if an international student comes to Canada and studies a 4-year degree, well, is that student a Canadian citizen just because they're here for 4 years? No. All right, and of course, they're not Canadian citizens, which means that Heather is obviously not a Canadian citizen as well. Okay, and then as I said in the analysis here, I think this one should be pretty obvious. They didn't apply for PR, they didn't obtain PR, obviously they didn't apply for and obtain citizenship. So Heather does not have citizenship handed down to her or passed down to her. So those are all the answers that we've eliminated here. And with D, I think D is some pretty good practice because sometimes people will really overanalyze these answers. But remember, if something's a very obvious no, it's a very obvious no. Sometimes you have to take a step back and try not to add things to the story or anything like that, because sometimes that makes it a little bit confusing for you when you are selecting the correct answer. So speaking of the correct answer, let's look at A. All right, so let's take a look at A. So we've removed really the other options, but again, it's always important to make sure that we are really confirming the correct answer here. So with this, we could see that the Citizenship Act refers to people who are citizens right at the beginning, and if someone is born in Canada, well, that person is a Canadian citizen, right? No, because what if the person's parents are in Canada as diplomats, or if the husband is a diplomat and the wife is accompanying the foreign diplomat and they're both on, of course, those diplomatic visas? Well, then this does not apply to them. So a child born in Canada to a diplomat would not be a Canadian citizen, as we can see as we move on in the Citizenship Act a little bit deeper. So we can see over here that the paragraph 1A, as we can see, so a person born in Canada is not a Canadian citizen in this case, because of course one of the parents is a diplomat and the other one is of course accompanying the person, and neither have are citizens themselves anyways. Okay, so in the end, after this analysis, we got A as being the correct answer. So I hope you got that one correct. This is certainly a tricky little element in the exam, and I think it's a pretty easy concept, because when you think of a person being born in Canada, personally I find it a little bit unusual that if someone is illegal in Canada, that their child would automatically have Canadian citizenship. But that's the law, and there is a little exception to that, and that is, of course, if someone is a diplomat. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed this question. We had somebody come in here to the office today who just passed her exam. She dropped off flowers and chocolates for the staff, and it was really nice. And she said that working through these questions and working through all of the materials, she had all the materials as well, well, she said that that was really the key to her success. So I hope that you are using our materials as the key to your success. And of course, it's our pleasure to help you. So if you are enjoying these videos, we've got another 2 questions coming up in citizenship. And even after you pass the exam, we have so many great areas to work with you. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. And of course, our partners are there to help you as well. So have a great day, and I'll see you in question number 2.